I recently finished this animation for an app called BCheats using Blender's grease pencil tools, and I wanted to share some techniques I used to do it. So the first thing to do is to just go File, New, and choose 2D Animation, and this creates a new file that sets you up to do grease pencil animation. It automatically has a grease pencil object called stroke that has grease pencil data called stroke. It has a few materials started up. The camera is set up in front view, the background is white, a lot of little things like that. But for the sake of demonstration, I'm actually going to go into object mode and delete this grease pencil object because every new one you add won't have those things set up. So I just want to show what happens if you do a blank one. The default name is just grease pencil. I'm going to show the logo because that's kind of the most important thing. It's the first thing I started with. I like to name with this convention ending with GP in caps. And then while I'm still in object mode, I need my reference. So I'll Shift A again and choose image reference and get the logo. Automatically places it facing the camera. Great. And then I'll copy that name and put it in here and change the suffix to ref, which just puts it below, which is good for my brain. If you want to do something else, obviously do something else. In the object data properties, for the reference image, I can choose use alpha and turn that way down as low as I can and still see it, basically. So that I'll be able to see the grease pencil as I'm doing it. A few more things to set up before I start drawing. I'm going to create 2 new layers. Name one fills and the other strokes, and these layers just keep things organized. You can lock them so that you don't edit them, make them invisible, turn on onion skinning, and use them for masking, typical layer stuff. And then I like to split this properties panel so that I can always have the layers handy, but also have the materials handy. So I'm going to add a new material, and the default material is just black lines, which is actually really good. Make sure I label it. And now I think I'm ready to draw. I'm going to switch to my pen. And I can use Control middle click to get closer, Shift middle click to move over. And I'm just going to draw the B for this tutorial. Hold Tab and you can choose the different modes or go up here and choose from this list. So now if you just draw, it makes a stroke. And the default brush is pencil, which I don't like the look of as much as I like ink pen. It's just a little darker. It has the nice taper with the pressure. So use whatever you want, but that's my recommendation. And so it's using this brush with this material, and it's going on this layer, strokes. So now you're ready to draw. And it doesn't matter if you get this perfect, which is very good for me. I don't have the steadiest hand. That's actually not too bad. Grease pencil can save you if you're not able to draw. Hold Tab to get into sculpting mode. And by default, the brush is the push brush, but anytime you hold Shift, it actually temporarily switches to smooth up here. So you can hold Shift and it just evens out that wiggle a little bit. If you go in the corners, it'll give you rounded corners, which maybe you want, maybe you don't. I think I'll give it a little bit. But just to get rid of some of that shake, really helpful. And you can also press F to change the size of that brush, and then you can push and just get it to follow the reference a little bit better. I'm going for that hand-drawn look, and I'm actually going to do a little wiggle between frames. So I think this is a good amount of imperfection, still staying true to the reference. So I'll go back to draw mode, draw the inside of the B. And so a few problems came up here. If I try to fill this shape, it'll actually go through this. So I could use Sculpt to fix that, but it's a good time to use Edit mode. I'll zoom in a little closer. And with Edit mode, you can edit these individual points. I like to switch up here to Point Select mode so you can really see what's happening. You can just click and drag to box select a few points and then move them around. Sometimes you'll get weird artifacts like that if you move them too abruptly. Hit Escape to cancel that. So you can go to proportional editing and connected only. If you're familiar with Blender, all this stuff is very familiar. This is the same as manipulating mesh data, which is pretty close to what this is. It's not exactly like drawing in Photoshop. It's not exactly like Bezier's in Adobe Illustrator or a vector program. And this is where I can switch to the mouse because scrolling with the scroll wheel changes how far this fall off is. And so you can see if I want it to be very abrupt, I can do that. If I want to affect some of that, I can get it a little more like that and just wiggle it into place. Maybe grab that one and pull it up. That looks pretty good. Same problem down here, just fixing the mistakes. It's very convenient. And if you have a point that goes too far, you can always X to delete just that point. You can grab and put that in. So now I think I'm ready to fill this shape. So I'll switch over to the fills layer, which will separate the two, and make a new material. And this one should not have a stroke, but it should have a fill. Oh, and to color pick this color blue, I'm going to go back to object mode, go back to the reference, image, turn the alpha all the way up, go back to the grease pencil, back to that material, press E to get the eyedropper, and color pick it, and then put the reference back to the same opacity that it was, so that I get the correct color blue. So back in the grease pencil object, I have the right material selected, I have the right layer selected. Oh, I forgot to mention this grease pencil data is just called G pencil still. So I'm going to copy this name and put it in there. It doesn't really matter, it doesn't change anything, but down here, now it's labeled logo GP instead of just G pencil, which they will all be called GP 001, 0015, whatever. It's just a lot easier when you have a lot of objects to have this part of the screen organized. And then back in draw mode, tab to get into draw mode, you have to select the fill bucket tool. If we try to draw with this and the fill activated, it'll fill in that way. Maybe that's what you want, but I would have to trace this exactly, which would be a pain. So I'm going to use the fill bucket. And we run into a problem. It doesn't know to leave these parts empty. So originally I tried to make a new material that was the same as the background and fill those with that gray material. And it worked, it looked okay, but then you couldn't actually see through it, and that eventually became a problem. So I found a way around it. Bear with me here. If you hold Alt, you'll be able to draw a border stroke. I forget exactly what this is called, but it means that it only fills that section, which, oh, it starts to solve our problem. But the thickness is too thick. So I'm going to go down here, change it all the way to 1, hold Alt, draw all the way through that part that we want cut out, all the way down here, and then click here, click here, click here, and it's ready to go. We just need to clean up these border strokes, so I'll go to Edit Mode, select at least one point on each of them, press L, press X, delete them, they're gone. The only remaining problem is, it might be easier to see in object mode, there is still a little gap between these two parts. And if it's zoomed out pretty far, you can't tell from here. But if it is noticeable on yours and you want to fix it, here's how. Go to Edit Mode, click somewhere in the middle of this line to select one of the points on one of the sides, then hold Control and press plus or hold plus on the number pad until you have the whole row selected, and then you can press G to grab and move it down just a little bit so that it overlaps, and you have this margin of error in the thickness of that line, and then it won't have that gap anymore. It's a little tedious, but it's the best method I've found until they fix that, I guess, bug or oversight where it doesn't fill in these gaps correctly. That's a way to get around it. So back in object mode, it's looking pretty good. If we turn off the visibility of the logo, reference, that's what it looks like. If you ever want to change the thickness of these strokes, I'll show you. There's a couple ways. You can turn off the fills or turn off the editability of the fills so that we're only affecting the stroke, and then select everything, and I think it's Alt S. Yeah, so I can make it thinner or thicker. I'm just going to go somewhere like that. The other way to do it is in sculpt mode. You can change the thickness right here using this brush, but this isn't very uniform. It's hard to get everything the same amount thicker using the brush unless you zoom way out and maybe just hit it a little bit. Even that wasn't very uniform. So I like the edit mode way, but if you, whatever you prefer. As far as animating this, so far we have one keyframe on each of these layers. I'll unlock it at this point, and it's on frame 1. I like animating on 2s. It gives that kind of hand-drawn feel a little bit more, even though we are going to be drawing each one. So I'll go to frame 3. Oh, I changed the start. So I'll go to frame 3 where there is not a drawing yet, and as soon as I go to drawing mode and draw something, anything, it puts a new keyframe on that layer at that time. The highest quality way to get that boil wiggle effect is to just do that same thing we just did again. Go to draw mode, go to the right layer, choose the right material, pick up your pen, and draw a new line. As soon as you draw one line, it will erase the stuff that you had before because you're replacing it. You're making a new keyframe here. But I've already shown you that once, so the quicker, easier way to get that same look, if I undo, is to go to sculpt mode and use the default push brush and change the strength quite a bit lower. Then all I do is just touch each of these lines a little bit, kind of push some in, push some out, change the shape a little bit all the way around. And as soon as you make a change in sculpt mode, it also creates a new keyframe. And then you can flick between the two and you can see it changes just a little bit. It looks all right. You can kind of tell that it's the same drawing, just mushed around. But if you're in a hurry, this is a lot quicker than drawing the whole thing each time. So then I go forward 2 more frames, do the same thing again. I put it on the wrong frame. So if you drew 3 individual frames, or if you sculpted 3 individual frames, now you have them down here. You can do more, but I think 2 just looks like it's flickering back and forth. 3 looks good. You can Shift D and move it over whatever that is, 6, and then press Shift R and it'll repeat that action as far as you want, and then see how it looks. Yeah, it looks all right. I think I could improve that a little bit. But for argument's sake, let's say it's good enough, and I'll show the absolute laziest method. Select all those keyframes except the first one, hit delete, and then down here in the modifier properties, we'll add a new grease pencil modifier called noise. By default, it's a little weak, so I can turn this up. Oh, you can't see its effect when you're in sculpt mode, so go back to object mode. And then by changing this seed, we can see how it's going to animate, and that gap is really starting to create a problem once we do this. It also has some weird artifacts around sharp corners and stuff like that. So you can change the factor down a little bit. Sometimes I've gotten up to 8 without being a problem. Right now 3.9 is looking okay. And then the step is how often it recalculates. So to animate on 2s, you just change that to 2 and then press play. And it looks okay. If you're really in a rush, that is a way to do it. But obviously drawing each frame is gonna look better than that. So that's it for part 1 of this tutorial. Subscribe if you want to see more of how I did this, and the project files are available down in the description.